How are you,
How are you, Janet?
Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV.
Welcome to World Inkers Network. I'm Dustin Pickering, your noble and honest host. Today we are doing a book launch for Dr. Laksmisree Banerjee's book, Dusk-Decked Rainbow Quilts, and we will show that cover in the program. We have four wonderful and excellent scholars today with us to discuss this book and offer their Janet.Wilson, Smita Agarwal, Meenakshi Mohan, and Anita Nahal. So I'm glad that our guests are here, and I'm glad to announce that we're going to be starting. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I'll bring all our guests on to the panel. We'll start with Dr. Nahal. Would you like to offer your comments and read maybe a poem or two from Dr. Laksmisree's book?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Dustin, for having me on this program.
I believe you are
I'm
muted.
really glad to be here to celebrate
Thank
Laksmisree
you.
and her poetry, particularly the book Dusk-Decked Rainbow Quilts. So I'm just going to give a short summary and read a few passages from two poems. I want to begin with the fact that she dedicates the book to her parents and to Jayanta Mahapatra and she says for infinite gifts and blessings. So the tone of the book is set from there. This collection truly epitomizes the weaving and intricacies, therefore, of the quilting of our personal lives and those of others. So I'm going to read passages from the first poem and the last one because I think both of them truly bring out Laksmisree Banerjee's poetic vitality, the diversity and wholesomeness about this whole notion of quilting our lives. Laksmisree is one of those poets who has that winsome quality about her in her personality and poetry. She can fine chisel words and present them lacquered with tinsel and glowing sparkles. The first poem of the book, Dusk-Decked Rainbow Quilts, that's the name of the book and the name of the first poem, is like an entire universe. It's like a cosmic window, like in Krishna's mouth that his mother saw when she urged him to open it. This first poem is also like Paulo Coelho's Alchemist, like as if the alchemist is walking with us or holding our hand and revealing to us and guiding like ancient roamers or Krishna, enlightening us again and again in a reimagined Gita. This is a poem of wonder and loss and love and yearning and quite haunting indeed, quite unclaspable, I would say, like water in our palms. You cannot hold water. And hence its allure and magnetism. It's a feminist poem, not a female chauvinist poem, but rather a poem on womanism and a poem about the underprivileged and about geriatric populations or an aging world. It's all about history, contemporary and future times, and it includes that that Renaissance kind of spirit with a phoenix-like hope at the end. So I'm going to read just two stanzas from this poem, and then I'll go to the second one. Dusk Rainbow Quilts. First, I skim on the surface of that carved ancient trunk, coarse wood with dainty filigree brass carvings on edges, gone grey with the ages, stored in feudal hideouts, turquoise, glossy, hidden secrets. Before I go on to the next stanza, I think someone's mic is on because I keep getting an echo. everyone to turn off their mic, please, and just put it on when it's your turn. Thank you. Thank you. And then in the middle of the poem, Lakshmi she writes, I feel invited to open the grand old huge coffer, lying forlorn behind closed doors, clandestine, forgotten reams of sagas, stories entombed in this dwindling mansion. So obviously this poem is about, very personalized, about a house, about a mansion, about her memories. She further goes on in that stanza, stories that I darn, born of many stories, my prying eyes like those of a curious researcher, the mind of the inquisitor in the turmoil of enterprise, as I seek to unravel the tales tucked inside. I love that last line, and I have written something similar in another poem because we all have stories to tell, and our stories are unique, and each one's story is different and unique. So I really like that she brought that point out. And then in the end of this poem, it's a long poem, so I just wanted to read 3 stanzas. She says, I nuzzle these swaths of quiet flamboyance of generations of mothers and grandmothers with their side-lined trappings. So, side-land trappings to me refers to the fact that mothers and grandmothers are sometimes sidelined. Sidelined trappings of helpers in empathy and partners of silence. I read through the chronicles of glory in concealment as I poetize and rewrite my life of so many lives. So, to me, this first poem seems like it's a magnum narrative story poem, like Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, or many other similar narrative poems, with the intent, I believe, to expand our optic and ideation cognition. The second poem I would like to speak about is the last one, and then read a bit from it. It's called Only for You. And though I'm a writer myself, my first training is as an historian. I teach history. And therefore, the first poem and the last poem resonated so deeply for me, beside many in between. And I think these 2 poems are clear examples of the historical concept of change and continuity. That's how societies move. There is a certain amount of change and certain amount of continuity and certain amount of stagnation or stabilization. These semantics in both the poems actually match. If you read very carefully, there are certain words that are picked up in both, almost like these 2 poems, not necessarily like a chiasmus, but they kind of mirror each other, kind of reflecting each other in emotions, thoughts, and trajectories. In this poem, Lakshmi Shri also employs the literary device of a refrain in every other line, which is a very effective manner to stress, reiterate, and draw the point home, which came through successfully in this poem. It is also a love poem, which leaves the reader, at least to me, it seemed like a love poem, leaving the reader guessing as to the exact meaning. So, a poetic allure, I would say. The employment of this repetition, this tautology, this literary technique of tautology, leads to a lyrical aura, encasing the poem and its meaning, reminding me of similar poems by Maya Angelou, for example, Come and Be My Baby, or as Robert Frost's poem is Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Night, or William Shakespeare in Twelfth Night. So I'm going to read just a couple of lines and then I'm going to sum up. Only for you. I sip the wine of life only for you. I sculpt my path of being only for you. I traverse through your golden dust only for you. I tread the ways of storm only for you. I swim in the deep only for you. I walk the sandy shores only for you. I look for pearly shells only for you. And towards the end, by the time you reach the last sentence, she writes, and here I'm going to give you examples of how there are some words that are similar. At last I reached the egress of transcendence between the rising and setting suns, Burrowed in my dusk-decked rainbow quilts, the title of the book and the first poem. As I repair my wrecked stores of diadems, I'm in caskets of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, similar to ancient caskets in the first poem. My satin swaths soothe the hidden lesions, closed boulevards now softly unseal with your luster on the blushing horizon in the euphoria of past darkness. My eyes gently open with the dawn. So all these lines also remind me of one's personal story and universal stories, similar to the unraveling of the story in the first poem. So by the time one reaches the end of Laksmishree's book, having gone through all these poems, and these two that I picked out to read, one has literally breathed in a profound sense of fascination laced with very realistic turns and twists of life. So there is this fascination, there is this imagination, there is this dream world, there is this suggestion. However, it's very realistic when talking about the twists of life and living and loving and surviving. So, dear Lakshmi Shri, with those comments, I congratulate you, and I am indeed spellbound by your poetic presentations in your very enchanting book. Thank you for the opportunity to read it and to be here and to discuss it and celebrate you. I wish you the best.
Well, thank you, Dr. Anita Nahal, and it's been really pleasant hearing your commentaries, especially like your summary of the poem. Intrigued with the poem itself and your historical knowledge being brought into the presentation. So we're going to go next to Dr. Meenakshi Mohan with her presentation of Dust-Decked Rainbow Quilts, and her knowledge is spectacular of poetry. So we'll let her present, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Thank you, Anita, for bringing that poem only for you, because that was one of the poems that I was sort of very intrigued, and I was about to choose that one to read, but I'm glad you read it. Okay, anyway, so I want to first of all thank Dustin for organizing this event and allowing me to participate with some other stellar presenters. It is an honor. I want to congratulate Dr. Laksmisree. I call her Shri. So, Sri, I hope you don't mind if I keep calling you Shri in this one. It's a pleasure meeting all the presenters. I have known Shri for quite some time now. I am always in awe with the depth and power of velocity in her writing, as if poetry resides in her heart and being. She's an encyclopedia of words, weaving poetry after poetry, every beat of the heart. I call her sometimes at night and she's saying, I'm getting up and writing something. Gosh. In this book, she has woven a tapestry of history, mythology, political, spiritual, and feminist issues. In her preface, she said, I have always believed in building human bridges with my understanding of wholeness and illumination through the multi-hued quilts of life. I love the book's title. The poem uses the quilt as a metaphor to convey women's stories woven with threads and joys and sorrows. The title implies the layers of stories and histories. Dust symbolizes neglect, and which is already forgotten, while the rainbow suggests hope and diversity. This perspective is critical as it highlights the strength and complexity of Indian women, reminding readers of their cultural heritage and ongoing societal struggle. I want to mention one more thing before I read my poem and discuss that. Even though the poem's central theme centers around women, I really liked it. She mentions in her preface that her approach is not one of belligerent feminist or female chauvinist, because that leads to another bias. Her approach is based more on humanistic values, and sort of it resonates with my philosophy about how I feel about that. So thank you, Shri, for that. Before I start discussing the two poems, all the poems in this book are beautiful, evocative, poignant, and vividly illustrated. But two poems really touched my heart, and those are Silent Scream and the last poem. Silent Scream poignantly portrays a woman's life, um, highlighting the societal expectations and sacrifices she endures. The last lines emphasize the cyclical nature of women's experiences, with each generation facing similar challenges. So first, let me read the poem. It's a little long poem. I'm going to read it. Okay. So here it is. Her silent scream. Her scream has traveled long through the hollows of ages, in the silence of whispering dogmas. A playful child she was at 9, with peals of laughter enlivening her pink cheeks. Her dimples gleeful, with a clinking glass of bangles holding lovingly her slender wrists. The crackling jingles dim, the blossoming trees and foliage, all in sync with her quiet cries. While the foreboding swelled deep within her childish bosom, with her calves throttled by tradition, soon her glass bangles broke, brittle like her silent crying heart, her whole self enchained in gold. The young bridal pushed into the alien household with her veils in subterranean folds of her trousseau. An under creeper wrenched out of her soul for painful transplantation, her shrieks now deep as the ocean. No dearth of kith and kin or friends, no dearth of relationship half-baked, in-laws, children, grandchildren. Her Lord in sunny glory of triumph, revamping her through decades. She is seeming command as the screams pierce deeper into her loan. She remains forever the forgotten trophy, now a sudden horizontal marble white, the grand matriarchal dressed up again. Her final journey as lavish, pallid, and ashen as that first one, with gleams and screams. She, the Mahadurga, and her karkas floating now, worship, immersion, festivity, facades, all drown, fading into memories and birds of generations of women with silent screams, dying every instant with their fortitude of dreams. When I read the silent scream, actually, even though it's not about Abhaya case, it's about the bride and all that, long time, Abhaya case happened much later, but the silent scream kind of brought me into the Abhaya's image, came into my mind. It also sort of highlights, how the pervasive nature of violence against women, which transcends generation. Abhaya's case just one example of the countless women who have suffered the facades mentioned in the poem. Society masks the deep-rooted problems of gender, inequality, and violence. The poem resonates with poets with Kamala Das, who works such as an introduction, also confront the suppression of women's voices and emotions within societal constraints. Like Das, she uses vivid imagery to convey confinement and emotional suffering, particularly in lines like her scream has traveled long through the hollows of ages. So it continues. Yet she portrays women enduring silently freedom while alliance with Maya Angelou's in silent I rise. So the other poem that I had, but I think I read a very long poem, so I won't read that. But the other poem was the last poem. Let me see. And I'll just read two paragraphs. She weeps, the sun weeps in the vermilion skies of the sunset, yearning in your sandy estuary, buried in weeping time. Actually, these two lines are very powerful. She's language evokes the melancholic beauty of impermanence, where natural elements like the sun weeps in the vermilion skies of the sunset symbolize ending. um, in fact, I wrote a whole book of poems. It's called Tamam Shudh. So I was just thinking of that. This poem can be compared to Rabindranath Tagore's, some of his poems, which addresses the poignancy of fleeting moments. Like I like his style, and also a Pablo Neruda's style. Nature nature poetry, like in his 20 love poems and a song of despair, uses the metaphor for loss and yearning. This poem is also lyrical. I think I will call this poem very lyrical and kind of spiritual in nature. So that is that, for the two poems that I had read. But my last word that I would like to say about Sri in conclusion is, I want to say that Sri uses powerful imagery and thematic choices to emphasize silence, resilience, and beauty of fleeting moments. This connects her work to rich lineage of poets, who have explored personal and universal struggle. And many of us could kind of resonate with that. So thank you, Sri. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. It's wonderful to hear, especially as you call from the introduction, the feminism from a humanistic standpoint. I'm glad you brought that into the discussion, and thank you for your knowledge and expertise in poetry and the discussion at large. Next, we will move to Dr. Smita Agarwal. Would you like to discuss your presentation, your views of Dust Decked Rainbow Quilts? We'd love to hear you.
Yes. So thank you very much, Dustin. And many congratulations to Laksmisree for such a wonderful book of poems. Thank you, Dustin, for having me on your show. And I'm so privileged to be on the same platform as Anita, Meenakshi, Janet, and Laksmisree, discussing her wonderful book. So to begin with, I would like to say that this is a good book of poems on recollections of the past, childhood in particular. It has poems on aspects of a woman's life. It has poems on facets of love and how love may lead to surrender, spirituality, and transcendence. However, the thing that struck me the most about this collection is the title itself, Dust Decked Rainbow Quilts, the image of which becomes a metaphor and an organizing principle for the book, for it is referred to in the first poem as well as the very last poem, Only for You, as well. Now, Lakshmi Banerjee has an imagination that is adept at balancing duality, and it is adept at upending our established notions. Dust, in the conventional sense, is something that makes us feel uncomfortable and dirty. And yet, for this poet, dust can bedeck, it can decorate even a rainbow. And what is this if not life, where black and white, good and evil, joy and sorrow must coexist in the human mind and heart. The very ordinary, the quintessential, must and can lie beside the glorious and the dazzling. This ability to exult in contradiction and to revel in paradoxes is the special ability of this poet's imagination, and it is this which becomes the magnet that draws readers to the poems in this book. For me, dust decked is thus an oxymoron. And the poet does this quite often in the book. For example, somewhere she has a phrase, poorly rich women. And there are many others also. So for me, dust decked becomes an oxymoron. And as the poet's imagination dwells in contradiction and paradox, Banerjee stylistically uses oxymoron to negotiate this challenging terrain. So, this is what I felt about the book, and now I shall read a few poems. So, I'll just have to open that document. Now, I had thought of reading two paragraphs from the first poem, "Dust Decked Rainbow Quilts," but Anita has referred to it already, and so has Meenakshi. So I'll leave that, and I'll go to uh, Mirror. There is this poem called Mirror, and this poem I like because it's about the process of writing poetry, how poetry unbolts and unknots the creative person. The muse is he, a handsome lover. The creative process is akin to the act of making love between the imagination and human emotions. Creativity is incandescent, comforting as well as terrorizing in the recognition of the fact that the poet is mirroring life and some higher creative force. So, with that introduction, I'll begin the reading. And this is Mirror. Poetry knocked suddenly at my door and tiptoed in as I unbolted my clogged heart and all its latches. Soon the tangles were unknotted, the jigsaws became kaleidoscopes, dead leaves sprung back to life. He came in as my mature Cupid with arrows glistening in a carnival of colors, non definable yet wise like the morn. Poetry entered in resonant whispers of the wrenching hoofs of his white steed, with clouds, corals, pearls in his swipe, golden, breezy, and momentous in sunshine, and the twinkling glow of alert stars. As he reawakened me to the flush of youth, poetry came and went like the lightning, robust in fire feathers of touch, a sudden fireball of water to allay the knife, gleaming in love and terror, a mirror of life. Now, the second poem that I had wanted to read was Only for You, but again, many people have discussed, the presenters before me have discussed this, so I shall leave that and I shall talk of Fireflies Holy. Now, in this poem, we find a rapturous description of nature. This poem is very Wordsworthian in its style, using words like verdant vales, etc. The poem gently weaves in the humans into the tapestry. Nature arouses the amorous in the human spirit, which engages in a luminescent ballet to realize that the chimes within wed like the river and the sea. Despite the outside din, they wed like the river and the sea. This poem is an emotion, is an emblem of hope in the chaos of the world. This poem celebrates human capacity to bond, to love despite obstacles and hurdles. The lush imagery and the musical chime make the poem very attractive to the reader. So here goes Fireflies Holy. Up on the verdant silver hills, the picturesque gleamy stills, peaks calling loud on vales, in fiery peace beyond gales, motions fervent high and low, yearning winds warmly blow, glow worms, sparkling lights, on holy animate nights. Summit pierces down in love as dreamy plains gaze above, with serene, impassioned breeze blowing among rocks and trees. Sun shines now in amorous rays. As it dances in lambent waves, I dive into the fathomless deep, meeting you and me in rising sleep. Luminescent ballet chimes within, our river and sea weds outside the din. So thank you, Lakshmi Shri, for a very engaging book of poems that I liked reading. And over to Dustin and Janet now.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear from you, and I appreciate you being on the program. And for a second, I'm going to invite all people viewing today to subscribe to the channel, and maybe leave some comments if you'd like during our program. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Janet.Wilson to the program to read her presentation and to discuss dusk-decked rainbow quilts available from Pen Prints Publications, thanks to the publisher, and it's on Amazon.com. So thank you very much, Dr. Janet.Wilson. Please, you can unmute yourself and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you for inviting me, and Laksmisree, thank you indeed for the welcome invitation, and congratulations on your lovely book. It's been a pleasure to read it. So just a few observations about this as a collection. I found the title, the Rainbow Quilt Metaphor, a very useful one for embracing the diversity of poems and the range of allusion to classical and Indian mythologies and legends. And it's essentially female outlook, all of which is symbolized by the practices of quilt making, tapestry, and needlework, which evoke the work of women in connecting to ancestral voices, to lost stories, to the role of inscribing their lives and events artistically as well as through words. I find the book has a very colourful, imagistic and evocative style, but as well it has a very taut and spare one, especially in the poems towards the end. There are some long meditative poems, such as the first one, and some very short, succinct ones, as though Laksmisree is pausing between her longer reflections to provide a kind of another summary of her material, as in the poem called Jigsaw, which ends with the sudden realization of the paradox of life and death, one being the inverse of the other. It begins, life is bewildering, a jigsaw, the offing, and it ends in one moment so perplexing, death becomes the apex of life, beyond all understanding. So that kind of distillation is very welcome alongside the very flamboyant and exotic poetry that comes in some of the poems. Themes of sexual and spiritual union dominate, and tributes are paid to the muse and to sources of creative inspiration. The female poetic presence is infinitely variable and fluid, can travel to the four corners of the earth and beyond that into the cosmos, can change shape and slip into new elements, gliding through water or through the air. In the poem, The Mermaid and Pegasus, she celebrates the freedom of living in the tides with my scales, fins, and concerto of soul as, quote, a mermaid free on my coral thrills in expansive marine merriment, flaunting my elemental tresses, billowing countless kisses, the trellis. It's wonderfully exuberant and all-embracing and liberating as she receives the winged poesy of the underwater love from Pegasus, the god of, I'm not quite sure, but anyway, it is a classical god of wings and flight. But in particular, there is the homage to the soul in Nude Dazzle, which I'm going to read bits of, not just because it's Dustin's favourite poem, but I can see why, but because I think it is in many ways the nub of the collection. I mean, it contains in its very raw state much of the thinking that goes into Mirror, which was the poem I was going to read, Smita, but I changed my mind at the last minute, fortunately. Rendezvous and Mermaid and Pegasus. So in this address to my swan of the soul, Laksmisree is calling up this creative visionary element as a seer and also as a mirror to her being and an enhancement of herself, making her believe in poetry. I cry in the invincible faith and fire is the end of stanza 4. So I'll just read selectively. It is an interesting poem, and I'm not sure I've got to grips completely with it, but I feel that we're circling around some of these ideas in all of our different presentations. Dear my swan of soul, my seer of love fathomless, how we mirror each other's innards. I swim with you slippery, in untouched blueness, watery ablutions beyond mire. And then to skip to ecstatic moment of union and togetherness is this prospect of departure or of loss. When your detached azure bleeds in the rainbows of my heart with wrenching unspeakables, and honeyed yearn for your embrace beyond eons of time and space, reeling in cycles of dance, how I cry in invincible faith and fire. So this is moving into a different consciousness space altogether. And then the poem moves on to something which is most unfeminist on the surface, and I'm still teasing this out, but it's a stage, it's not an end point. I fall, spliced beyond surrender. I'm wrecked beyond redemption. My love beyond shame and blame, as your arrows pierce me with joy. Your whirling dervish and grace, myself, your amorous Saki beyond desire. So here, the voice, the poetic voice seems to be almost abnegating herself or becoming a sacrificial presence, yielding to the force that is being confronted, almost with the language of the mystics of immolation. And here we come back to this imagery that struck me first of all of moving between different elements and of occupying different aspects of being as represented by earth, sea, fire and flame and air. My skirt flutters its mad wings in your skies and sees inebriate in the wrap of your sensuous spirit. I clasp you tight in the light of the aureoles. Purity of darkness gleams crystal clear. arousing my nude transcendence in the rhapsody of your lyre. So here I believe, there is this paradox that has already been mentioned about losing oneself to find oneself here, to find a different kind of unity, maybe of a mystical union. And the lyre, I think, is evocative of Orpheus, the god of music, capable of transcending between heaven and earth, perhaps a very telling word on which to conclude. So, as I said, I think this is a really rich and deeply felt poem, and I hope I've made a start on trying to explain it. Laksmisree draws from classical myths for metaphors of poetry, as you've heard, by being winged and immortal, and is indelibly shaped by the romantic concept of ecstatic union and love, as boundaries between people and between human and non-human dissolve. In Rendezvous, she travels on the backs of Swarovski swans whose flapping wings show the liquescence of love, transmuted in feathery embrace, igniting, quote, my pen and voice in resonance, soaring across the roof of the world. In Sea Watcher, she is in a liminal space, not submerged in the elements. When, quote, on the shores of the Andamans, she considers history and legacy of the ocean as conceived elementally as a womb that reflects and contains mirrors of civilizations and empires, making the human endeavor seem like hubris. So these elements, like water, fire, and air, provoke meditation on the powers which effect change within the human body and force recognition of our place in the wider scheme of things. Laksmisree also reaches into history and legend of Indian and European worlds to provide dynamic images of the female creator as a figure of power and strength. The swan of love, or the spirit in the nude dazzle, is just one that can lift the individual by providing the power to fly and go beyond the mortal level. And this spells out the special powers of the creator. And in this, to my Western mind, and putting this poetry against the poems I know best, which are Western poems, it recalls to me the feminist poetry of the 1980s that was so popular in Britain, and the belief that a woman's tradition developed through female solidarity could change the politics of representation as women began to enter public life. And it dealt with, this poetry dealt with issues of sexual inequality, the victimization of women from violence, self-empowerment. All of this received new attention, and poetry gained new audiences. And I think there's elements of all this in Laksmisree's collection. And if we look more closely, I think we could draw some of these issues out. But I'm in particular interested in making a comparison, a very loose comparison, with the New Zealand-born but UK-based poet Fleur Adcock, who died last month. Adcock broke new ground for writing poetry for women and providing new figures of female empowerment, built from alternative mythological and legendary sources, in which she challenged inscriptions of female passivity and male control by interrogating patriarchal patterns of meaning indirectly. And she did this by disrupting fixed subject positions. One of her poems is called The Ex-Queen Among the Astronomers, and it pictures female self-possession against the higher enlightenment powers of science. It opens by showing the queen, the ex-queen, as male-dependent, who walks as she has been taught to walk, but she asserts her desire in the last two stanzas, suggesting a self-empowerment approaching transcendence. Mouthing the tubes of flesh, her hair crackles, her eyes are almost sparks. She brings the distant briefly close, above his dreamy abstract stare. So in other words, the female has the power, by force of her sexual presence, of a telescope in being able to overcome the tyranny of distance. In other words, challenging the power of science. Laksmisree shows a similar belief in female empowerment, while also recognizing vulnerability, as in the poem Bruised Hope, where the speaker is the man's trophy, quote, ever adorned in static display of glorious shame. But she will rise above such confinement as her, quote, ivory soul is unquenchable. It waits to wing away to distant land of tender hope and flurry, a messiah in sail, an illumined speck in gale, lighthouse in me. I was especially taken by the poem On a Greyhound Bus to Northampton, because this refers to the occasion when Laksmisree first came to Northampton, and she and I met at a post-colonial conference held there in 2007. This poem has a more anecdotal and stronger narrative line than the others, and I'll just read a few lines to give you a sample. It's quite different. On a cold, pallid morning, when the gardens became nettles, blooms and trodden disarray, when desiccated shells of oysters and dead corals blackened the aquamarine, I set out on a Greyhound bus from London to Northampton, while I felt the claws of the storm and people seated with frozen faces, calcified whiteness without smiles, splintered humanity travelling together to the margins from the metropolitan, as I set out from London to Northampton. The opening presents an image of dullness and chill, paralleled by the white middle class narrow-mindedness as a background to what becomes a sharp observation of racist discrimination, as the driver throws off the bus two Jamaican students and an Islamic old lady. I couldn't help thinking at this moment of my husband's poem, also about a bus ride in Northampton, which he wrote from the view of the windows as the town seemed to fade away before his eyes. And I'll just read you a little bit because it just seems such a coincidence. It's called Writing in Northampton. I had this one chance to write a poem in Northampton. There I was, standing at the bus stop, eager to get stuck into the real thing, notebook and pen in hand. But I'd misread the timetable, and the bus came and suddenly took off in a harebrained race to get out of town. And to cap the confusion, Northampton became muzzy with rain. It was heart-stopping, crazy. I rubbed at the steamy glass of the bus window and nearly fell off the seat as soggy canyons of streaky, bleary houses puckered up and hurtled towards me. A moment of panic. The poem was lost. Only the title remains. Writing in Northampton is forever swaying into the distance, the words hazy, groggy, picking up speed. So Laksmisree also writes in a similar way. She says, that was an eye-opening day. There were squally skies and a blurred vision. Whether the cosmic lights went off, darkness prevailed more within than the arrogant winds outside. So both poets are finding similar perspectives on the landscape and the social climate, although they're writing about completely different things. But in this sense, they are compatible. Both imply Northampton, the town, leaves something to be desired. Laksmisree shows a blurring of the world of justice as she witnesses an act of discrimination. For him, the weather conditions have robbed him of the chance to write down the planned poem. And so both provide a tourist bird's eye view. One, in Laksmisree's case, giving a political consciousness that contrasts quite strongly with the female subjectivity that dominates the rest of the book. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Presentation, and I think it was very detailed, and I like that you brought the mythical elements, the justice elements into the discussion. I'm going to bring up the book's cover for now, and then I'll let Dr. Laksmisree speak a little bit about her, her response to the appraisals. I'm going to bring this up. This is the cover of the book, Dust-Decked Rainbow Quilts. As you can see, it's beautiful and colorful. It's available on Amazon. Thank you, Pen Prints, for publishing this, and I'm going to leave it to Laksmisree to speak a little bit and give you a few minutes to respond to the appraisals that we've heard today. And you're welcome to talk and discuss the book and the process that went into it. You should be unmuted now.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
You can hear me? Hello? You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, first of all, really, I want to thank Dustin for organizing this program of my friends who are very eminent scholars and poets, and for taking up my book and talking about it. I'm really delighted. I'm humbled. I'm honored. And it, of course, gave me, as always it does, when there is such a unraveling, when there is such a discussion, one gets to look at one's own poetry or creation in a more objective way. The unraveling the interpretations by others make you perhaps more alert, more aware about what you have written. So the perspective enlarges, and I'm very grateful to all of you for having done that. And this poem was written over a year or so, over a period of a year. And I always think that it is like encompassing a lot of living experiences. So much has been discussed here. I'm so grateful. And it does have a lot of paradoxical material, because life, I believe, is dichotomous. And so it happens often spontaneously, because poetry, after all, it's very spontaneous sometimes, though we edit it later. But whatever comes out is something which I deeply believe in, and that is right or correct about every poet who writes. And this kind of paradox, this kind of oxymoron, or this dichotomy is something which I find, after writing and looking back at the poetry, somehow the dichotomy is ever present, I believe, in my poetry. Somewhere I feel like, the night and the day, and how light is born out of darkness, and how we are all entangled in both sorrows and joys of life. So the duality of life is often very much a part of, I believe, my poetry. And thanks to my friends and scholars and poets who have really, I think all of you have done such great justice in reading and understanding, and then bringing out the evocative part as well as the underlying part. So I would like to just read one or two short poems. Well, if I may use the word neo-colonial urbanization, there are two poems here which are, of course, most of my poems, they are born out of either some real or sometimes some surreal experiences, or some submerged feelings. Now, these two poems which I want to read, one is Hungry Glitz. Now, this is about some real experience, which of course has transmuted itself. It's called The Hungry Glitz, and it is about the neo-colonial, post-colonial, urbanized world, where again, it is full of tragic paradoxes and contradictions. So here goes this poem, Hungry Glitz. It's page 67. Yes, both of these two poems which I'm reading, they were born of some very real life experiences in Park Street, which is Calcutta, and it is known to be almost like a very famous street of the world, like almost like Champs-Élysées of Paris. So Park Street, but there are many tragic paradoxes. You know, if I read the poem, you will see it's full of tragic paradoxes. Park Street is a great street where all the time you have these sedans, and you know, it's a posh area. Despite that, there is a dark underbelly, and that is what I am writing about. Hungry glitz. Grey fog had settled silently with catty paws after sundown across the clandestine bend of Park Street and Free School Street, in the dim lights crisscrossing the glitzy arena, enjoying their regular joke. A blanket of dark miasma gasped with cold life as the wintry garment of mist wrapped around the shriveled body, chewing crumbs with street dogs. The black woman in shimmers ran down her dirty staircase to scatter her fake glimmer. Mind you, the black woman in shimmers ran down her dirty staircase to scatter her fake glimmer, her outcast glamour among hungry men, to stand and catch her belching prey. The moon winked from afar. The moon winked from afar as she stood by the roadside, tongues of flames baking lust, liberty, and license in the cauldron. Questions thrown from laughing stars. Who was whose prey anyway? And there is another one that too is, Park Street again is a very famous street. And this is called Two Souls in Company. It is page 91. It is page 91, Two Souls in Company. Mother and son. I saw the hide and seek of light and darkness, of gloss and gloom, tearing across cruel, zipping cars around the sallow crossroads, winding through his emaciated body on Park Street, that famous road of India. There, where the dim alley loses itself in the ritzy highway, engulfed with gluttonous light, as his lean, starved body danced a fervent snake in wriggles on the razor edge of agony on Park Street, that famous road of India. There is a refrain on the last line of every stanza. There's a refrain. With angst in his every bone and move, artistry submerged in brown sorrow, in harrowing orgy of a death dance, like a hungry Indian Jackson, moonwalking on the dirty pavements, as nonchalant passers-by fling their coins on Park Street, that famous road of India. puny change in his torn straw hat, puny change in his torn straw hat, weathered by many a storm, weathered by many a storm of ignominy, aching hunger in joking street sparkles, his movements in limpid sprints, a daily circus performed relentlessly for morsels, for his ragged mother on Park Street, that famous road of India. She comes along with a walking stick, a welfare blindness in her own world, a welfare blindness in her own world, full of her love and lilt to hold her son, silently shutting out the fake trivia in stride, silently shutting out the fake trivia in stride, at sundown ignoring the blazing glitterati, with lights peeping from worn out clothes on Park Street, that famous road of India. Two souls, returning to their tranquil hovel, two souls returning to their tranquil hovel, two souls in loving search of one another, two souls in the calm darkness of the night, two souls happy in their union at day's end, two souls the divine crutches of one another, two souls in the embrace of peaceful penury. I wonder at last, did the British really leave India, or did we become nutshell mirrors of empire? That was especially for Professor Janet, Professor of Post-Colonialism. I don't want to sort of put you into a framework, but still, I thought the post-colonial was playing in my mind, So that was it.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to quote from the introduction by Candace Louisa de Quinn. She says, the poems are written achingly unpretentious, exquisitely raw, and an unfiltered language and willingness to engage the reader at a primal level. Now, I want to ask all of you, how do you feel that description fits or not? And how do you feel that the poems engage at a primal level? So anybody want to answer that or go forward with that? Go ahead. If you're muted.
Unmute. Meenakshi, unmute.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
I take this, my perspective. The poem in Laksmisree's book, come from her heart. In the mirror poem, she writes, poetry knocked at my door and tiptoed in, as I think Smita read that, as I unbolted my clogged heart and all its latches. Poetry is the mirror of the heart. Her poems are evocative, vivid imagery, and free of use of symbolism, allowing readers to interpret her words through various lenses. So I believe that they are very unpretentious, raw, and unfiltered language. So that's my take on that one. So thank you.
Do either Smita or Janet want to answer?
Well, I think it's quite a shrewd assessment, actually. It's quite accurate, and yet it's not the only one you could make. But it does actually penetrate to some of the strengths of Laksmisree's work in seeking dynamic moments of connection and doing this with a sense of vulnerability, intense emotion, and of passion. And you don't find this a lot in poetry today, actually. So I think it's worth making that observation. But as I said at the beginning of my piece, I also find there's some quite spare and unadorned and distanced observations that don't belong to that type of writing. So it's not the full story, but it definitely sums up what your work is probably going to be best remembered for.
Excellent. That's a good counterintuitive response, and I appreciate that. If we can go ahead with the next question I have, which is, how does the collection fit with the stories of Indian women, and how does the title introduce that, as well as why do we think that's important? Why should we consider the stories of Indian women, and in particular in today's world? Why is it important for us to hear the assertions of female voice? So either Smita or Janet, would you like to answer that?
Smita?
Could I ask a question of my own, if that's all right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So I'd like to ask a question of Laksmisree. People have been talking about the spontaneity of your poetry, the rawness of your poetry. And yes, perhaps in some poems that is your strength, but then that is not your only strength. As Janet pointed out, there are some poems that are spare, that are, well contained in whatever they are trying to express. So in a book of poems, I don't think you can, you categorize the book in a nutshell and things like that, because the writer encases in an entire book of poems, the writer encases various aspects of their creative sensibility. Having said that, the question I want to ask is that this is your 11th book of poems, and that is pretty amazing for me. It shows that you are a very committed writer, and also that you are very prolific. The muse is very benevolent towards you. So the question I'm asking is that tell us how you feel about your craft, your practice. How has it evolved? How has it changed? How has it grown in terms of themes and stanza forms in the course of these 11 books of poetry that you have published?
Thank you, Smita. That was a real good question, and it has about 2 or 3 segments to it. Firstly, I feel, and I have always said this. The other day, I was sharing this with Janet also, and I sincerely believe in this. In Florence Howe's No More Masks anthology of American women poets, there is a line which says that being a woman poet is like not just dealing with human and nature relationships, but also encompassing a difficult world. And how I correlate this with my journey, I actually started writing poetry very, very early, which was, of course, not published. I was just a kid, and I would get inspired by some writers and musicians' meets in our house in Kolkata. And I used to get I'm just talking about the beginning, how it may have permeated my being somewhere. So I would write 4, 6 lines here, there, and the papers would run around in the breeze, and my mother would pick it up and try to store it and things like that. But that was long ago, when I was a kid or a child of 8 or 10. But later on, I started publishing. My first book was in 1987, when I was just, beginning to teach. I was a young lecturer. And I think the lilt and the lyricism, and also some other harsh emotions which infiltrate. I don't try. Actually, what Meenakshi said, she's so right, because she may be calling me up from USA in the middle of the night. And not only she, there are many women or men poets also calling me up, which is night in India. And then, oh God, what are you doing? I'm writing poetry and I'm half asleep. So, I'm half asleep, but I have to, at 3 a.m., most of the times, I'm awake. Suddenly it will, somehow it's just like the birth of a child. I think all of you know. It goes on kicking and kicking and kicking till, of course, that's not the final poem. I have to catch the lightning. And of course, the next day and the other day and the next other day, of course, the editing goes on. But somehow, somehow life makes me, or my experiences of life, they somehow become like a conceived child. And they start sort of kicking me in my tummy till I take it out. And then, of course, the editing process, that's much later. So a lot of incongruous, a lot of paradoxical, a lot of dichotomous, a lot of, almost like what Florence Howe says, encompassing a difficult world. I mean, difficult in a larger sense of the term, not just difficult, but in the living experience, a network of experiences, almost like a kaleidoscope or a rainbow, something. Of course, this rainbow has come up just now. This is a title which quite amazes me, perplexes me, but still, just that it has come.
I wondered if you felt your poetry fit into our the world today. It's so full of angst and catastrophe, and how do you feel your poetry is a response to that?
Well, three of my other books are in the publishing process, and I can vouch for one thing, that these poems and those poems, the ones which are coming up, my 12th, 13th, and my 14th book, they are not mirror reflections. I mean, I don't think they may be comparable sometimes somewhere, but the angst, for example, the next book which is coming up, I don't want to break the news, but it has a title which is almost like a bomb blast. I don't know whether it will be a bomb blast, but it's not exactly like this. So the angst is more there. I might as well tell you the title of the next book. It's called The Red Woman. Okay. Now, this is the first time I'm breaking it in public. So, but I don't think that book or the poems there are really in any way mirror reflections of this one. So I write as I write. I just, but I feel greatly delighted and grateful, not just now, but anywhere in the world, even if I'm addressing a classroom in Delhi University of MA or MPhil students, or somebody somewhere outside the country, I feel very delighted. And, because I get an interpretation, I get a larger view, an unveiling of my poems in a manner that, I just open my eyes wider, It makes me so grateful that I start, and I think this is true of all of you, of all poets who listen to interactions and interpretations of their poem. You feel very delighted that, oh my God, oh, is it so? Oh, when I wrote it, let me think about it. Yes, this is. So, that gives you a perspective which you may or may not have thought about, like that.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have a few words to share or a question?
I could answer the question you asked earlier about the collection telling the stories of Indian women, because it seems to me that if you're taking the major metaphor of dust quilt decked rainbow quilts, then this is much broader than just India or South Asia. People make quilts all around the world. Indigenous
Yes.
quilt making is a very known form of expression and practice, artistic practice. It's practiced in North America. It's practiced in many other parts.
Everywhere.
So to me, the title conveys something more universal. And in fact, the poems do too. And many of the issues that Laksmisree is talking about may have an Indian setting or refer to particular Indian places, but they can easily be seen in other terms as well, in other contexts. So to me, it's much broader as a collection than an Asian, South Asian voice. Yeah. So I can't say why that's important today, but it just seems to me that many of our cultural parameters are more global now, more globally inflected than they used to be. And
Yes.
I think this is just an aspect of that shift in our cultural world, the way in
Yes.
which they join up together. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Janet is actually she's so right, because somewhere the interpenetration of the universal and the personal,
Particular,
it happens.
we call it the local,
And
the local and the global. Yeah.
Yeah, the local and the global. The global is so much a part of our contemporary lives also. I mean, in our everyday life, in our lifestyles, the kind of lifestyles we have. You can nobody in this world can say, well, it's only solely Indian, or it's solely American, or it's solely English. No, there's an interpenetration. And so I think that's reflected in our literature also, naturally, because
Yes.
literature is a mirror of life. So that interpenetration is there. Yeah,
Yeah, I
very
think
much.
it's subliminal. We're not even aware it's there half the time. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
As soon as you start using the English language as your medium of expression, you automatically catapult yourself into a global arena.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because it is a
Absolutely.
global language.
Yes, it is a global language, yeah. And it's also, sometimes when we don't find an equivalence of the word, we do use italics, and we do use so much. There are today, I think, 4,000, I don't know, Janet, as far as I remember, 3,500 or 4,000 Indian words absorbed in the Oxford Dictionary. Indian
That's a
words,
lot.
I mean.
That's
That's a
quite
lot,
a number.
yes. Yeah.
And that's since
Between
colonial
3,000.
days, over two
Yeah.
centuries, 3
Yeah,
centuries.
yeah, absolutely. And it's like, it reminds me of Sujata Bhatt's that famous poem about her mother wearing a sari, and how the global comes into the Indian local. So the moment, as Smita says, that the moment you start using the language, of course, you become global. And maybe the global consciousness is there all the time. So
No, but I also think the metaphors you've chosen and the images of your work are ones with a global resonance as well. Especially
yes,
the idea of linking women's writing to
I think there's a lot
quilt
of
making
yes, quilt making has been, yeah,
and
that's it. I mean,
tapestry
it has been
weaving,
it's all over. Yeah,
craftsman. Yeah,
and I
yeah.
like
I
the
don't
fact
know.
that there's
like that.
a lot of
Yeah, because
mythical
some,
elements. Go ahead.
some reviewers, they've given very great reviews of this book, but somewhere they have mentioned that quilt making is Indian, and that's not true at all. That I've written in my author's note also, that it's all over. That in the Eurocentric as well as in the Indian world, women have yarned and crafted their stories through needlework in their embroidery for loved ones, etc., etc. So that female quality of quilt making, and I think it's Elaine Showalter, if I'm not mistaken. There's a book on this quilt making, and Elaine Showalter, the literary critic of feminist
Yeah.
criticism, she does talk about quilt making in America. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of evidence to show that it's very
Yeah,
widespread. Yeah, even today.
Yeah.
I like the
So
way you use
while
myth as well in the story in your poetry, and I think that
Yeah.
that is interesting because, and I think you also take a kind of the contemporary lens of, like the poem you read about the street in India, and you create a common myth out of a contemporary world.
Yes.
So I think that's
while
very interesting.
while we are on this subject of the global and the local, there is another question that has come to my mind, Dustin. With your permission, may I go ahead with that?
Yes, go ahead.
So Lakshmi Shri, you begin the book with a quote from Tagore, right?
Yes.
And elsewhere also, I think you have talked about Tagore being a great influence on you. You are a
Yes.
consummate singer of Rabindra Sangeet, Tagore's songs in Bengali, and you sing them. And that's perfectly normal because you're a Bengali, and Tagore has, totally captured the Bangla imagination. Now, the influence of Tagore is evident all through your book in terms of vocabulary, in terms of the idioms that you use, the language that you use. You'll say things like MORN, mourn, the short form for morning. You will talk about somebody coming on a white steed. You will use the word azure. There are lots of Tagorean references in your poems that perhaps subconsciously creep in because Tagore is such an important aspect of your imagination. So my question is that in the 21st century, how do you make your style, and how do you make this Tagorean influence contemporary and relevant?
Uh, Firstly, I accept what you say almost as a kind of a congratulatory remark to have, but sincerely, if I speak, yes, Tagore has impacted me very much through the upbringing, through these soirees, those whatever. But if you say I've imbibed and permeated it, but more unconsciously than consciously, it's a great compliment, though. It's a great compliment to have been impacted by Tagore, not just the Tagorean, yes, the Tagorean philosophy, the larger philosophy of life, where I always say Tagore was perhaps, I would say, not perhaps, he's a seer bard, right? A sage bard. And the Tagorean ethos is like if you read the 153 poems of Tagore in the Gitanjali, of which 103 were translated by him from Bangla, and the rest by Yeats. Now, like in his introduction, Yeats says that of course, Yeats later on, he had changed his stance slightly, but if you read the introduction to the Gitanjali by W.B. Yeats, who recommended him for the Nobel Prize, he does say that these are poems which will not be enclosed in libraries, and the boatman will sing the poems, and they will be like the dust and the everything which is universal. So this kind of what Tagore does is this kind of divinization of the human and the humanization of the divine. Prem and puja, love and God, are two sides of the same coin. Now, as a creative person, it has impacted me, not, as I said, not so consciously, but definitely very deeply and unconsciously. So, somewhere, if I have looked at many of these poems and I find somewhere the transcendence part of it, somewhere the grim underbelly of life. I go on talking about it, and suddenly, there is a dawn of revelation, or there's transcendence. So, this culmination of everything which is negative in life into something which is absolutely ethereal may have been some impact from Tagore. That's what I feel.
Wonderfully explained. That does explain. There are certain poems where you feel that very much in the ethos or the manner of Tagore, there is soul searching, and there is the yearning of the soul for a higher entity, and this
Yes,
whole
yes,
aspect of surrender in love that your
yes.
poems contain, that are it's you're quite right, it's not consciously done, it's always been there around you in
Yes.
your Bangla Samaj, and that's how it's so seeped into your imagination.
Oh, that's
But I
great.
would like to,
That's
yeah,
illuminating. Yeah.
yeah. I must say one thing, and I
Mhm.
must admit it also. You see, uh, you see, I was brought up in an atmosphere more, not just in school. School, of course, was at that point of time. Loreto House in Kolkata was Irish nuns, and they were also mothers. They were not sisters. That was one part. When I came back home, one part of my home, like my grandfather, he was in the British police service. All the time he was, reading Daffodils or Wordsworth or Keats or Shelley. And then my grandmother was reading Tagore in Bangla. So this was kind of a medley, not so conscious, but both the worlds were seeping in, the English world, the Irish world, and this Bangla world. And somewhere, without me knowing, also, it was happening. So I think that was a very pleasant medley somewhere. Now that you talk, now that I'm consciously thinking, and thank you, Smita, for bringing up the topic.
That's
Thank you
very
very
much
much.
like, that's very much whatever you said, very much like A.K. Ramanujan. He talks about
Yes,
the upstairs language and the downstairs language. So the upstairs language was the language of his father's study, which was English, and the
yes,
downstairs language was the language
yes,
of his mother and grandmother and the kitchen area, which was Kannada. you know
yes.
so indians are lucky, they are born into a multilingual
Absolutely.
environment. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Cosmopolitan, secular, I would like to underline it over and over again. And we are basically very, in this land, we are basically very, very cosmopolitan. And I think one reason for that is, of course, Calcutta, I must say, was the capital of the British Raj, not Delhi. It was Calcutta. So we went on with our Durga Pujas, and on the other hand, we went on inviting the sahibs to have dinner with us and sit on the ground, and yet they are sahibs. So this kind of melee, medley kind of thing, I think it happened naturally, historically. It happened with the Bengalis, you know, because that was the capital of the British
We're going to
Raj.
go ahead. We're going to go ahead and conclude now. This has been a
Yes,
wonderful
Yes.
yes,
discussion, and I'm glad for all four that joined us today. And thank you, Laksmisree, for your wonderful poetry. And I hope our viewers will subscribe to the channel. And if you want to get in touch with me to suggest a show, be a guest. We look for poets, musicians, writers of all kinds, artists. Definitely get in touch with me at publication.worldinkers@gmail.com. And I'm glad for today's show. I hope you guys will get to writing really soon. And thank you for joining us, and subscribe again. And we'll see you soon. Get to writing.
Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the Parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the Parrot.